She thought she was marrying him for money, just a desperate deal to save her mother's life. But what if the man she promised to love was the father who disappeared from her childhood? Torn between a contract she can't break and a secret she can't bear, she faces an impossible choice: reveal the truth and risk losing everything, or live a lie and never know the love she's always longed for. Stay with us as we unfold a heart-wrenching story of betrayal, forgiveness, and a bond neither time nor lies could destroy. Before we begin this emotional journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss more powerful stories of love, family, and second chances right here on Hearts and Billions. Leela sat by her mother's hospital bed, clutching her thin, frail hand as machines beeped steadily around them. Her mother's breathing was shallow, her face pale and tired. Leela blinked back tears, wishing there was something, anything, she could do to ease her pain. But the truth was brutal. The bills were piling up. The doctors were talking about stopping treatment, and Leela's 2 jobs weren't enough. She felt trapped, alone, and terrified of losing the only family she had left. Late one night, Leela stepped outside the hospital to catch her breath. The cold night air stung her cheeks as she pulled her thin jacket tighter. Her phone buzzed with a message from a stranger. "Meet me tomorrow. I can help you for a price." The next day, she found herself in a quiet, upscale cafe, sitting across from Charles Davenport, a silver-haired billionaire with tired eyes and a guarded expression. His suit was perfectly pressed, his watch gleaming, but his voice was low and hollow. "I need a wife," he said bluntly. "For appearances, you need money. We can help each other." Leela's heart pounded so loudly, she thought he could hear it. The words felt dirty, wrong, but when she thought of her mother lying helpless in that hospital bed, she knew she had no choice. She looked into Charles' eyes, searching for any sign of cruelty, but saw only loneliness and exhaustion. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "How long would this marriage last?" He hesitated. "1 year. After that, you'll walk away with enough to pay your mother's bills and start over." Leela's hands trembled. As she reached for the pen, he slid across the table. As she signed the contract, a tear slipped down her cheek. She told herself it was just business, just survival, but deep down, a tiny voice asked what kind of life could ever come from a marriage built on desperation and secrets. The day of the wedding came faster than Leela expected. She stood in front of the courthouse in a borrowed white dress, the cheapest she could find. The fabric felt stiff and scratchy against her skin, and her hands trembled as she held a small bouquet of wilted daisies. Charles arrived in a sleek black car, stepping out in a perfectly tailored suit. He looked like he belonged in a magazine, but his eyes were tired and distant, as if he were miles away. He barely glanced at her as he offered his arm. "Let's get this over with," he said quietly, his voice empty of emotion. Inside the courthouse, everything felt cold. The judge read their vows in a monotone, the words echoing in the quiet room like a sad song. When it was time to say, "I do," Leela's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and forced herself to speak, but her heart ached. Charles slipped the ring onto her finger without meeting her eyes. His touch was cold, almost robotic. He said his vows with the same flat voice he'd used in the cafe, like he was signing a business deal, instead of pledging his life to another person. When it was done, they walked out together, but it felt like they were strangers walking in opposite directions. Photographers waited outside, people Charles' assistant had hired to make the marriage look real to the world. They forced themselves to smile for the cameras, but Leela's eyes were glassy with unshed tears. In the car ride to the mansion, they sat in silence. The city lights blurred past the window, and Leela wondered what she had gotten herself into. She expected a cold, transactional life, but the reality was even more painful than she imagined. She glanced at Charles, hoping for a kind word or a sign of warmth, but he stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The only thing colder than the night outside was the space between them, a space filled with secrets, fear, and the unspoken truth neither of them yet understood. Leela's new home felt more like a museum than a place to live. The mansion was grand, filled with shiny marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and rooms so big her voice echoed when she spoke. But everything was quiet, painfully quiet, and the silence made her feel small and alone. Charles kept his distance, spending his days locked in his study. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, it was about practical things: what time dinner would be served, what public appearances they had to attend, what stories to tell the press. One evening, as Leela explored the mansion, she paused by a gallery wall lined with old photographs. Most were of Charles at company events, shaking hands with important people, but then her eyes fell on one faded photo. a young man in his 20s holding a newborn baby, smiling brightly beside a woman who looked familiar. Leela's breath caught in her throat. The baby had wispy dark hair, just like hers in her mother's old pictures. The man in the photo looked exactly like Charles, only younger, softer, happier. She ran her finger over the glass, a chill spreading through her chest. Could it be him? The father who left her and her mother when she was just a baby. The one her mother said she'd never see again. She staggered back from the photo, her mind racing. It had to be a coincidence, didn't it? But the longer she stared, the more the doubts grew. She remembered stories her mother told about her father, a man with sharp blue eyes, a cold temper, and a love for business more than family. Leela wanted to ask Charles about the photo, but every time she tried, her voice died in her throat. If it was true, what would it mean for them? For her marriage, for the secret she never meant to uncover. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the mansion's shadows feeling heavier than ever. The man she married to save her mother might be the man who broke her mother's heart, and she didn't know how long she could keep that fear buried inside. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion's walls felt a little less cold each morning. Leela kept herself busy, tending the small garden in the courtyard, reading in the grand library, or cooking simple meals when the staff left for the night. One evening, Charles came home late. His shoulders slumped as he walked through the door, his eyes dull with exhaustion. Leela stood in the foyer, holding a tray with a warm meal she had made herself, a simple chicken soup. He paused when he saw her, his eyes lingering on the tray before flicking up to her face. "You cooked?" he asked, his voice soft but confused. Leela nodded shyly. "You look tired, I thought. Maybe you'd like something warm." For a moment, Charles just stood there, the silence thick around them. Then he stepped forward and took the tray from her hands. Their fingers brushed, and it sent a strange warmth through both of them. They ate together at the kitchen counter, the grand dining table feeling too big, too formal between quiet spoonfuls. Charles asked about her day for the first time. His voice was hesitant, like he wasn't sure how to have a normal conversation. Leela told him about the roses she planted, the book she found in the library, the way the sunset looked from the west balcony. Charles listened, nodding slowly, his eyes softening with every word. For the first time he laughed, a low, surprised sound that made Leela's heart ache. "I can't remember the last time someone told me about something simple. Something real," he admitted quietly. After dinner, he offered her his arm as they walked through the dark hallways. His steps were slower, more thoughtful. He asked her about her mother, and when she spoke, his eyes glistened with quiet sympathy. That night, as Leela lay in bed, she realized Charles wasn't just a cold, distant billionaire. Beneath the ice was a man who once knew how to laugh, how to care, and her heart began to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to their marriage than either of them expected. Leela woke early the next morning, unable to shake the warmth of the previous night. She felt a small, unfamiliar sense of peace as she tiptoed through the quiet mansion. As she passed Charles' study, she noticed the door was slightly open, something that had never happened before. Curiosity tugged at her. She stepped inside and gasped softly. The walls were lined with shelves of old books and photo albums. A dusty leather chair sat by a fireplace, papers stacked haphazardly around it. Leela's eyes landed on a stack of photographs, spilling from an old envelope on the desk. She picked one up with shaking hands. A young woman with kind eyes and dark hair stood beside a man who looked unmistakably like a younger Charles. In the woman's arms was a baby with dark curls and a familiar round face. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. The baby was her, the woman was her mother, and the man was Charles. A sob rose in her throat as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just a coincidence. Charles wasn't only the man she married to save her mother. He was the father who left them behind. The father she had cried for at night when she was small, wishing he would come back. She sank into the leather chair, clutching the photograph to her chest. Memories of her mother's stories came flooding back. Stories of a man who loved them once, but chose his ambitions over his family. Stories of a heartbreak that shaped her mother's life and hers. Leela's mind raced. How could she face Charles now? Should she tell him the truth, or keep the secret buried forever to protect her mother and herself? That evening, Charles found her sitting alone in the courtyard. She quickly hid the photograph in her pocket, forcing a smile she didn't feel. He sat beside her, closer than usual, and they watched the stars in silence. But inside, Leela's heart twisted with every beat, torn between the growing affection she felt for him and the crushing truth she couldn't ignore. The days after Leela's discovery felt like walking on a tightrope. Every time Charles looked at her with quiet kindness, Her chest ached with guilt every time he asked about her past. She changed the subject, terrified he'd piece together the truth. She kept the photograph hidden in the bottom of her dresser drawer, but its presence haunted her. At night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions. How could she keep pretending? How could she ever tell him she was the daughter he thought he lost? The marriage that had started as a cold business deal was changing. Charles was gentler now, offering small smiles, asking how she felt, even walking with her through the mansion gardens. He told her stories about his regrets, about a woman he loved and a baby girl he lost. His voice would crack, eyes misting with memories that clearly still haunted him. I wanted to be a good father, he confessed one evening, his voice barely more than a whisper as they watched the sunset together. But I was too proud, too focused on success. By the time I realized what I'd lost, they were gone. Leela's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to tell him the truth right then, that she was his daughter, that he wasn't too late, but fear held her back. What if he hated her for lying? What if he sent her away? Meanwhile, her mother's health worsened. The hospital called more often, urging her to pay bills she couldn't afford without the marriage contract's money. She was trapped, desperate to help her mother, yet terrified to destroy the fragile trust growing between her and Charles. Each day felt heavier than the last. Leela avoided Charles' eyes, her heart breaking more with every secret kept. She knew she couldn't hide the truth forever, but she didn't know how to survive when it finally came out. Despite the heavy secret in her heart, Leela couldn't help noticing how Charles was changing. He began spending less time buried in work, and more time sitting with her in the garden, or sharing quiet dinners by the fireplace. He surprised her one rainy afternoon by showing up at the hospital unannounced. Leela found him standing by her mother's bedside, holding the old woman's frail hand. His eyes were soft, full of regret. "She's a strong woman," he said quietly, glancing at Leela, "and so are you." Leela's eyes stung with tears. It was the first time he had spoken to her mother, and he did it with a tenderness that reminded her painfully of what she had always wished for as a child, a father who cared. Over the next few weeks, Charles started telling her stories from his past. He spoke about his mistakes, his ambition, and how he pushed away the people who mattered most. He admitted he had once lost someone he loved more than anything, his baby daughter, and that not a day passed without thinking of her. "She would have been about your age now," he said softly one evening, staring at the fire. His eyes shimmered as he looked at Leela. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of person she grew up to be." Each word felt like a blade to Leela's heart. She wanted to scream that she was right there, sitting across from him, that he hadn't lost her forever. But the fear of what he'd think if he learned the truth kept her silent. Instead, she listened, nodding, offering comfort while hiding the very secret that would heal them both, or destroy them completely. As Charles opened up more each day, the walls around his heart crumbled, and Leela realized how much he had longed for love and forgiveness. But with every moment they grew closer. The weight of her secret grew heavier than ever. Their growing closeness couldn't stay hidden forever. Rumors began to swirl among Charles' business rivals, and even his household staff. Some whispered that Leela was a gold digger scheming for his fortune. Others said she must have something to hide, because why else would a young woman marry a man old enough to be her father? One afternoon, a tabloid article exploded online, sharing pictures of Leela at the hospital, speculating about her past, and suggesting she had married Charles under false pretenses. Charles' closest advisors urged him to reconsider the marriage, warning that his reputation and company were at risk. When Charles confronted Leela in his study, his eyes were cold again, like the day they first met. He threw the newspaper onto the desk, the headlines screaming accusations neither of them had spoken out loud. "Tell me the truth," he demanded, voice low but shaking with anger. "Why did you really marry me?" Leela tried to explain, but every word tangled in her throat. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she begged him to believe she never meant to hurt him. But his face only grew harder, lines of pain and fury deepening around his eyes. "Was any of it real?" he asked hoarsely. "Or was I just your ticket to money from the start?" Leela's heart shattered. She tried to tell him about her mother, about the hospital bills, about how she had come to care for him more deeply than she ever expected. But the truth, the biggest truth, still stayed locked inside her. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, reaching for him. But he stepped back, his face pale. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. "I can't trust you." That night, Leela packed her things, her hands trembling so hard she could barely fold her clothes as she stepped into the cold night. She looked back at the mansion, praying he would call out for her, but only silence answered. echoing with every step she took away from the man who was both her husband and her father. Leela returned to her small, dark apartment, the one she had lived in before the marriage. It felt colder and lonelier than ever. She spent days sitting by her mother's hospital bed, her heart hollow with grief and fear. One evening, as her mother woke from a restless sleep, she saw the deep sadness in Leela's eyes. "What happened, my sweet girl?" her mother whispered weakly. Leela broke down, sobbing into her mother's frail hands. She told her everything about the contract, about Charles' kindness, about how he had started to feel like family, and about the terrible discovery she had made. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she listened. She gripped Leela's hand with surprising strength. "You have to tell him the truth," she urged, voice hoarse but determined. "He deserves to know, and so do you." Meanwhile, Charles sat alone in the mansion, staring at the old photograph Leela had left behind by accident, the one of him, his lost love, and the baby he thought he'd never see again. His heart pounded as he compared the baby's face to Leela's. He remembered her eyes, her smile, her kindness, all the small details he'd tried to bury over the years. A horrible realization crashed over him. Could it really be? He whispered, his voice cracking. Fueled by desperate hope and fear, Charles rushed to the hospital, ignoring the shocked faces of nurses. As he stormed down the hallway, he burst into the room to find Leela and her mother holding each other, both crying. Their eyes met. "Is it true?" he choked out. "Are you my daughter?" Leela couldn't speak. She simply nodded through her tears. Charles fell to his knees beside the bed, reaching for her hand as tears streamed down his face. "I've searched for you for so long," he whispered brokenly. "I thought I'd lost you forever." In that moment, everything else fell away, the anger, the misunderstandings, the years of pain. For the first time, father and daughter held each other, hearts finally recognizing what had been missing all along. The days after the truth came out were filled with tears, long conversations, and quiet moments of healing. Charles moved Leela's mother into the mansion, determined to give her the best care possible. For the first time in years, Leela saw her mother smile without worry. Charles and Leela spent hours walking the garden paths together, sharing stories of the years they had lost and the dreams they still had. He apologized over and over for the pain he caused when he left, his voice breaking every time he admitted how much he regretted his choices. "I thought pushing you and your mother away would protect you from my mistakes," he confessed softly one evening as they watched the stars. "But it only destroyed the family I wanted more than anything." Leela forgave him with tears in her eyes, realizing that both of them had suffered for years because of pride and fear. Together, they promised to never let secrets or silence stand between them again. When Leela's mother passed away peacefully weeks later, she did so knowing her daughter was safe and loved. Charles held Leela through her grief, standing by her side like the father he was always meant to be. In time, the mansion transformed from a cold, empty building into a home filled with laughter, shared meals, and love. Charles supported Leela as she pursued her dreams, encouraging her to finish school and start the small art business she'd always wanted. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments of pain and sadness for the years they lost, but every sunrise they shared reminded them of how far they had come and how precious their second chance truly was. Together, they proved that even the most broken bonds can heal, and that love, forgiveness, and truth can create a family stronger than either of them ever imagined. Seasons passed, and the grand mansion that once echoed with silence now overflowed with life. The gardens bloomed brighter than ever, their flowers swaying in the soft morning breeze as father and daughter walked side by side, sharing quiet moments they once thought impossible. Charles never missed a chance to remind Leela how proud he was of her. He cheered the loudest when she held her first art exhibit, standing at her side with eyes shining. Leela, in turn, learned to trust the love she had once thought would never come. A love not of romance, but of the family she had spent her life longing for. Sometimes they still cried together for the lost years, but those tears were softer now, mingled with laughter, comfort, and the knowledge that they had found each other in the end. Every evening, they lit a candle for Leela's mother, placing it by her favorite rose bush in the garden, and every time the flame flickered in the dusk, they felt her presence, a silent blessing over the family she had held together even when everything seemed broken. Together, they learned that the most unexpected paths can lead us home, and that forgiveness can build a bridge stronger than any pain the past can leave behind. Because sometimes, even when love starts for all the wrong reasons, it can still end in everything we ever needed. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss more powerful stories of love. family, and second chances right here on Hearts and Billions. And tell us in the comments, do you believe forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds?